This is Ron Peters.
I'm Sam Long.
And I'm John Nugent.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. I'm not sure when this episode is going to be released, but when it does, know that we in the academic world are in full furor of getting ready for the next year. I remember when I was the vice president, all the catalog, getting that all set and ready to go because everyone needs it for some reason. I never understood why. Just kidding. But
To register students.
yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
And just like, but being on sabbatical, I have no idea what's going on, which is kind of nice on the one hand. But also, I just found out about something amazing this morning that I would have known had I been going to meetings. That John is going to talk about a new exciting development here in the academics at Great Lakes Christian College.
Yeah. So many of you may know that we hired Ed Rocket full-time this year as our professor of business. And one of his first tasks as full-time professor was to revamp our business program. So we used to have a Bachelor of Science in Business Management and then another Bachelor of Science in Business Management nonprofit. And the nonprofit one really wasn't getting a lot of students. And people were, I think, unclear about what business management entailed and what that prepared you for. So Ed got right to work. And so we are launching in the fall a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, which is one major with 5 different concentrations. And so those are accounting, finances, entrepreneurship. It's the hardest word for me to say and spell. But also management and marketing. So it's, you can go into any of those 5 fields with this this new bachelor's degree. And the exciting thing that we learned in the process of revamping this is we have an accountant who's been teaching adjunct for us, Jacob Van Adder, and he said, you're only a couple of courses away from being able to prep students for for CPA exam and licensure. Wow. I'm like, really?
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, for real.
And so, we've been doing some reconfiguration, and now the program is reconfigured such that students can get all the education requirements to become a CPA at Great Lakes.
Oh, man.
And then you just do your internship in the actual field and take your exam, and then you're fully certified CPA. So we've never offered that before.
No.
So we're pretty excited about that. And it's always been an option, and usually you have to do 4 years at the college level and like 1 more year at the master's level. Or there can be 5-year college programs. And so we are currently set up to where a student can, just like anywhere else, take 5 years and end up with a CPA-ready degree, which with a concentration in accounting, but also finance. And that's pretty standard. But the cool thing is the state of Michigan is considering new legislation. It's already passed the House, and it's in committee at the state level Senate to make it so a 4-year bachelor's degree could meet all the education requirements to becoming a CPA. Oh, and then you just have to do a longer time in the field before you can be certified. So we will also be poised for that. Like, it could be at the end of this month, the Senate passes it, and you can get a 4-year CPA degree at Great Lakes. So we're pretty excited about all those developments. Yeah. If you know someone who's going into business, Great Lakes is now a high-quality program. We've got a great bullpen of adjuncts to come alongside Ed as our full-timer, and I think our program is stronger than ever.
Without a doubt. When he brought that up in the faculty meeting, I was just really impressed with the amount of work he had put into this program. And having somebody who is trained in business come in, just give it a thorough examination and say, okay, here's what we're going to do to make this better is really exciting. And so I'm right there with you. In fact, some of the stuff you just shared, I didn't know about the legislature, going through the House right now and Senate. So that's exciting as well. Yeah, man, get on this thing. We've got a good program here.
Yep. All right.
Excellent. Also, as an aside, we have one professor named Rocket, another named Star. Just going to put that out there.
Shooting for the heavens.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to continue our series on the Lord's Supper. And finally, after a couple of weeks of
We're gonna talk about the Lord's
talking about Old Testament background and talking about the meal context of the Lord's Supper and the Messianic banquet context of the Lord's Supper, we're going to get to the passages most associated with the Last Supper, which is the Last Supper passages in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And
But before we do that,
no, we're going to actually jump right in. But we're going to do this in a very deliberate kind of way. We have three different accounts of the Last Supper. Arguably, John also has an account of the Last Supper. I mean, he does have a Last Supper account, but he doesn't talk about the meal, right, in the way that Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. So we're going to, and so there's a lot in common between Matthew, Mark, and Luke and how they tell it, so it's going to sound very much the same. But there are also significant differences.
Yes, there are.
And so we want to bring out what's the same, what's different, and what does this have to do with ongoing Christian practice. So I believe Sam's going to do Mark, and then Ron will read Matthew, and then I'll read Luke, and then we'll start the talking.
what about Exodus?
When we get to talking about the thing they have in common,
No problem.
then we'll talk about the Exodus background.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'll take care of it. I'm get to start with Mark, my least favorite, and
Your least favorite.
Sorry.
Interesting.
Mark chapter 14, starting verse 12, says this. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you at the Passover?" So he sent to his disciples, saying, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you to a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there.' So the disciples set out, went to the city, found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. Then, when it was evening, he came with the 12, and when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, 'Truly I tell you, the one will you betray me, one who is eating with me.' They began to be distressed and say to him one after another, 'Surely not I.' He said to them, 'It is one of the 12, the one who's dipping media, I don't know what just happened there, who's dipping bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man goes as is written, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born.' While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and gave it to them, and said, 'Take, this is my body.' Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. He said to them, 'This is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God.'" When they sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives, and that kind of ends the meal. So I'll stop there.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to read the parallel account found in Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 17. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal." I'm going to skip over the Judas account because we've already done that. But the important things, picking up in verse 27. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
All right. Now, Luke. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go prepare the Passover meal for us, that we may eat it." They asked him, "Where do you want us to make preparation for it?" "Listen," he said to them, "when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Make preparations for us there." So they went and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When the hour came, he took his place at the table, and the apostles with him. He said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat the Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. Then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, This cup is poured out for you. This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But see, the one who betrays me is with me, and his hand is on the table. For the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that one by whom he is betrayed. Then they began to ask one another, which of them could do this, right? Yeah. And then they have a fight about greatness, and he has to put them in their place. And then Jesus predicts Peter's denial, and then they have a conversation about purses and swords, and there's confusion there. And then they go to the Mount of Olives, where Jesus prays. So 3 different accounts, considerable overlap, but some subtle differences that you may or may not have caught as you were listening to those accounts. But, one of the things they all seem to have in common, the accounts of each one kind of begins by talking about the first day of unleavened bread, the festival, and preparing the Passover feast. Mm-hmm. So those 2, I think, require some kind of setting the stage to understand what this context is. And then maybe from there, and what, if anything, do they have to do with the practice of the Lord's Supper?
Yeah.
Shall I?
Yes.
Well, I'll do my best because it's not clear to me either. But bringing in the Passover unleavened bread context takes us back to Exodus 12, where there have been 9 plagues. There's a 10th plague on tap. And but before that, they need to prepare themselves, the Hebrews do, for what God's going to do. And so they have this festival instituted where they take a lamb for the family, they slaughter it, they do the whole blood over the doors and doorposts, they roast the lamb, they eat the lamb, and that is all an attempt to keep the angel of death from basically hitting their house and killing the firstborn. Yeah. That's what the Passover is that very specific thing to avoid the 10th plague. Then the next day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. It's a week-long festival where they don't eat leaven to remind them of the haste with which they left Egypt. So they're 2 technically different things, two events. One is to avoid the angel of death. The other is to commemorate how they left Egypt after that plague.
So why unleavened?
Because they were in a hurry. They didn't have time for the bread to rise. Right. And of course, it came to take on all sorts of other contexts as well, leaven being sin or things in their lives. And so they're spiritual things that come later. But practically, they're remembering, they left Egypt, and they're wandering around. They don't have time to, be baking bread. Right. And so not just the night of leaving, but also as they're, running for their lives, they're not stopping to allow yeast to rise. But they got to have sustenance. So they're eating unleavened bread. And so 2 different things celebrating 2 very closely related events. Mm-hmm. But then later it's supposed to be Passover one day and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread the next day. So when we read these texts, that's not what it says. It says on the first day of unleavened bread, they prepared to celebrate the Passover, which is not the way it's laid out in Exodus. And there are a lot of scholars who spend a lot of time trying to explain it all. I don't want to get into all their explanations, but something is going on, and I'm not sure we know exactly what. It could be the way they reckon time is different. It could be at this point in Jewish practice, they've become kind of synonymous, or like Passover is now the first day of unleavened bread festival, or it's come to include it. We don't know, but the way the gospel writers lay it out is this day is the Passover, but they're calling it the day of unleavened bread.
Yeah. Now, you've been a part of Passover Seders that people have done in the church, and it has become a tradition where, before the Passover Seder, you have this kids go throughout the house, make sure there's no bread.
Yeah, right? get all the leaven out.
And so the modern day practice of how far back does that go, you think?
I believe that the Seder meal proper didn't come about till after 70, after the destruction of the temple. I think that's when that that began to become what the modern day Seder, when people think of Passover, was not till well after Jesus.
So that practice conflates the Passover
Yes.
meal and the first day of unleavened
Correct.
bread, or is that just like well, either way? I mean, the unleavened bread would have to happen before then, so they can double check to make sure there's no leaven
Right.
before they eat the Passover meal. So it's possible by the first century, also these two could have been conflated.
It seems like that has happened. I don't. I mean, my interest in practice ends in about 500. Just kidding, BC. But not I think that I don't know if we know for sure, but that seems to be what has happened. Is they're kind of they've kind of mushed together in a way, and so saying one is kind of saying the other. Like saying we're celebrating Passover means we're actually celebrating unleavened bread, and vice versa.
And I think that's one of the challenges that you find in the New Testament is that we don't have direct evidence to say, when did this happen? And so, like, post-destruction of the temple makes sense, and I don't have a reason to challenge that per se, but there's always a possibility that, like, the further you get out into the diaspora, it may have already been occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know for sure. I don't want to, bet the farm on that. But you have to at least be open to the fact that even before 70, in some of these communities, they've already begun to think of Passover and unleavened bread as being kind of synonymous. Right. But at the same time, we don't want to go too far with that because there are other places where that probably wasn't the case. And I would think, especially around the temple in Jerusalem, they might be being more like, no, this is Passover, this is unleavened bread, and we don't want to mix them up. Like calendars are such a big thing that might speak to their resistance to that move.
Well, that's why I'm so surprised by that. The Old Testament is very specific.
Yeah.
Like the 14th day is Passover. The 15th day is unleavened bread. And so it's just weird for me to read the gospel writers kind of like saying it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, when we say conflating them, I think what we're talking about, I doubt in the first century they're saying these festivals are the same.
Correct.
It's just that we've kind of synchronized them a little bit so that the Passover becomes the feast that we use to kick off the Festival of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah.
Right? Like conflated them chronologically, but not conflating their meaning.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, not talking about that.
Gotcha.
It's like my wife has a birthday, but she celebrates a birth week, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it became impractical as, they're already asking for their employers in diaspora and even in the land when they're under Roman occupation, hey, we really want this week off.
Yeah.
But actually, can we have 8 days?
Yes. Yeah. We actually need another one.
Yeah, maybe there are logistical concerns that made it. You know what? The maximum number of people can participate if we kind of conflate them together chronologically.
And chronologically merge them together.
And complicating this, and we're not going to go into detail about this until we get to John, but John does this even more different kind of chronologically. When he dates the Passover, he actually has the day when the Passover lamb is slaughtered. He lines up with the day Jesus, sacrifices, gives his life on the cross, so that you kind of see him as the Passover lamb.
Yeah, huge theme in John.
And so, even there, the chronology is different than in the synoptics.
Yeah.
So, we just want to highlight the connection chronologically to Passover. It's definitely there. Passover is in the air. It's a Passover week.
Yeah.
It's within a day or two of when the festival begins, both unleavened bread and when the Passover begins. So it's there and it's together. The question is, I guess, how much of what the Passover meant and what the Passover was about should we read into the meaning and practice of the Lord's Supper? Like, is it best to think of the Lord's Supper, the Christian Passover?
Oh, right, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is by having the timing overlap like this, are we supposed to kind of project some of that meaning onto the Last Supper? I'm curious what you guys think of that.
I would start by saying yes and no. Clearly, it seems like it's more than a time marker for the gospel writers. That how they bring it up and the way they lay it out, more seems to be going on than just saying, "Oh, by the way, it was Passover."
Yeah.
So I think that much is clear. But I think because of the weird like vibe of the chronology, I would be careful to overstate how much it meant. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I agree with that. I think that all the gospel writers, they want us to read these events in conversation with Passover. That's just
Yes.
that's very obvious to me. But I think you're right that if we try to push that too granular, where everything about it has to be seen as Jesus as like the new Passover, we might be going a little bit further than they want. So I agree with you, Sam. I don't think it's just like it just happened to be a calendar date. That's diminishing it too far. And so let's talk about Passover and let's talk about the connections without trying to make Jesus too much, and then kind of going to the opposite extreme. So I think we're of a similar mind on that.
Because I think of like Matthew, who has no problem using typology.
Oh, wow.
Out of Egypt I called my son. Like
Yeah.
explicit
Yeah, that's right.
references to these things, but it's not explicit here. And so like I feel like if he wanted to, he should have said, and just as the Passover lamb was slain, something like that, but he doesn't do that. And
Right.
so it's like, it's just a step short of doing things he's happy to do in other places.
Yeah, and what I've kind of made a list of things that the Last Supper has in common with the Passover, and then things that it doesn't. And I want to read this and see if that gets any kind of reaction. So what does it have? What does it have in common? It's certainly like the same exact time of year. And at some level, if Jesus has to go to Jerusalem to die, and there's stuff about that, right, in the Gospels, and he's most often going to Jerusalem for the festivals. I mean, it's going to be a festival.
Yeah, it's not going to be some random day in the year.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that sense, it could be coincidental that it just happened to be the Passover festival. Right.
Could have been booze, but better than this Passover.
Right. But it is definitely the same time of year, and all the gospel accounts refer to that. And there is bread. There's bread in the Passover meal context. Well, more so, especially so, the unleavened bread. It features prominently.
Are we waiting to the end to discuss?
Yes.
Go ahead.
And then what they both have in common is that recalls a saving event for God's people. Do this in remembrance of me. That's what was said, not exact words, but of the Passover. This is a memorial. It's a remembrance.
Yeah.
Keep doing this to remember the Exodus, which is the event by which God formed and saved you and called you out as his set-apart people. And obviously, Jesus, in remembrance of him, we partake of the Lord's Supper. What does it not have in common? There's no mention of wine in the Passover meal, right? And that's kind of a big deal to the Last Supper and the memorial, the Christian memorial. There's no mention of covenants at Passover time, and covenant language is used of the Last Supper. There's no mention of unleavened bread at the Last Supper, in the Last Supper account. There's mention of bread,
Right.
but there's no statement about it being unleavened. There is no lamb or even any kind of meat or bitter herbs mentioned in connection with the Last Supper. We just don't hear about the rest of the meal, only the bread and only the cup. There's no mention of fully consuming the meal at the Last Supper or burning the remains,
Right.
which was part of the Passover tradition. There's no mention of, and this is more Captain Obvious, but no mention of sandals, staffs, or girded loins at the Last Supper. And all those were a key part of how the Israelites had to present themselves, right, from an attire perspective to celebrate the Passover. And there's no mention of, and this is what you were getting at, Sam, Egypt or any Exodus events at the Last Supper, right? So it's clear that this is the timing, right? But it's not clear that the elements of the meal and the practice of the Last Supper, as Jesus tells them to remember it, ramp on in a clear, direct way with the Passover.
Right.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Now comments.
I think what a lot of times we've done over the years, Christians, I mean, is we have like close connections that we just go all the way with. So like for the big one, I think is bread. And so the gospel accounts say he took bread and broke it and gave it out. Well, it must have been matzah bread, right? Well, there's no indication that it clearly was.
Yeah.
And we've done, I think the wine one particularly is interesting because so much has happened with the wine, both at the Lord's Supper and in modern Seder meals, that there's 4 cups and there's this and that. but there was no wine mentioned in the Passover accounts in Exodus or Numbers or Leviticus. And so, like, those things that we so now associate with the Last Supper, with Seder meals, weren't there in the original. And so it goes back to the question we don't have an answer to, which is how much has this celebration changed over the years, and what did it look like in the first century? And I don't know that we have a clear answer to that.
Yeah, I wonder if we're intended to see something broader than just the Passover meal. That the Passover begins to evoke not merely a narrowly defined event, which it clearly does, obviously, but a moment in Israel's history that, at least according to the text, includes other things. Because when you talk about like the blood of the covenant, this is obviously not anything to have to do with Passover, but it's clearly a big part of Exodus 24, with that blood and Moses sprinkling blood on the people and all that. And so I wonder if the idea is to evoke a broader narrative from the Old Testament that includes Passover and the significance of that, but extends into God's saving work in Israel and making them his covenant people. And the Passover is like the apex of them being delivered out of Egypt. And then Exodus 24 would be like that covenant ceremony where we become the people of God. And if it's both of those things that are in view there, and so I think that's where we can begin to think of it beyond a very sort of narrow definition, but to think more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's important that you bring up Exodus 24, and he's talking about verses 3 through 8, where, when God takes them out of Egypt and makes his covenant, there is an animal, right, that is slaughtered, and then the blood of that animal is like splattered on the people.
Yeah,
It's
Like
great.
that language is, it's funny, the movie version of that for the what's that show?
Chosen?
No, the funny one.
I know which one you're talking about.
The Promised Land.
The Promised Land, thank you, yes.
They've got a funny scene about
Yeah.
this. But like when you get to the actual meal of the Last Supper, the language, there is no Passover language used when they're actually at the table, right?
Yeah.
The Passover language is used kind of like a few paragraphs before, like, why are they going to Jerusalem? What time is it? And why are they even getting together for a meal?
Right.
Well, because it's Passover,
Yeah.
right? But when they get to the table, there's no Passover language. There's nothing talking about at the table that's describing Passover. And there is language of this is, this cup is the cup of the covenant. Some passages covenant, some passages new covenant,
Yeah.
right? And that clearly ramps on to Exodus 24. And I don't hear people making as strong a connection between the Last Supper and Exodus 24. What people go to, what special event does this go to? Well, the Exodus.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the covenant-making ceremony
Yeah.
that language is evoked. And I think that gets kind of put in the shadow when this is made to be all about Passover.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a few years back, and I should have reviewed this before jumping in today, but I know that this is basically true. I was comparing these accounts with the Septuagint account, the Greek translation, and there was a surprising amount of like linguistic connection there, more so than like if you read the Hebrew or English translations, which are obviously on the Hebrew. But it was really interesting to me. It's like, oh, look at that. From the language, there seems to be a stronger connection with the Septuagint version of Exodus 24. And so, yeah, that's why I try to help people. I direct people to that to say, yeah, let's think about Passover. I'm not trying to deny that, but let's not leave out other important parts of the story that I think are really crucial for understanding this particular, moment in church history, especially in the life of Jesus and his disciples.
Yeah. Another thing that gets left out when Passover becomes what it's all about is this language of took bread, gave thanks, broke it, gave it to his disciples. Like the whole last episode was us talking about Jesus's meal practice with his disciples.
Yeah.
The language here sounds a lot like that meal practice language.
Yeah.
And a lot like when he broke bread with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, right? After the resurrection. And a lot like some of the language that we find in Acts, right? Of breaking bread. And so I think, it has kind of helped us. I just wonder if, man, we all know Passover's in the air and no one's denying that, right?
Right, yeah.
Each of the Gospels is forthright about that. But when they get to the table, it's like Passover imagery and language is conspicuously absent. And present is the common meal language.
Mhm.
Present is the covenant making
Covenant,
language.
yep. Yeah.
That's and so I wonder if they intentionally muted the Passover elements because for the ongoing life of the church, that does get left behind,
Yeah.
right? And the common meal language is going to be really important for the ongoing life to the church. And the new covenant, associating the death of Jesus with the new covenant, is going to be really important for the church going forward. And so I guess my theory, put it past you guys, is that there's an intentional muting of the Passover elements because that's going to become less relevant for Christians going forward. And they want to hold up the elements that are going to be most relevant.
So this just pops in my head. So again, toss it out there for you guys to think about. Maybe I'm connecting things that shouldn't be connected, but if I'm going to build on what you said there, I find that really intriguing. Especially as the Gentiles are being incorporated into the church. One of the requirements for participating in Passover is all the men have to be circumcised. Like no uncircumcised males may participate in Passover. Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that happens later on, right?
Yeah.
And when there's going to be later Passover celebrations, circumcision has to happen first.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so as Gentiles are coming in, how are we going to celebrate Passover if we're going to say Gentiles don't need to be circumcised? Like this becomes sort of a problem. And so I could see where that might add to that idea of this is just not a part of our identity anymore. Obviously for Israel, that's a big part. We're not trying to say, anything different, but for this new kingdom that God is creating, we don't want to exclude the Gentiles. And so we need to think in terms of a combined Jew and Gentile body, a kingdom that celebrates in a way that honors these commitments that you don't have to become an Israelite to be a part of the kingdom.
Yeah. And that ties so directly, I'm glad you brought this up, with what we talked about last week. Like the kingdom banquet
Yeah, exactly.
that was Jesus's table is unexpected guests at the table.
Very good. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And this meal, Jesus's kingdom banquet, is an open table where the Gentiles eventually are going to be invited to the feast.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think distancing that Passover connection does make it more of that more inclusive kingdom meal. And then in Acts, it becomes a big deal. Like when the Gentiles finally get approved, it's Peter has a vision of clean and unclean foods, right?
Right, yeah.
It's meal imagery that teaches him that you're going to have to break bread with Gentiles going forward.
Yeah.
Like the Messianic era has begun.
Yeah.
And it's time for the Gentiles to be included at the table.
That just gives me a funny image. It's like getting your hand stamped. Okay, you can come in now. Got the stamp.
So, contrary position-ish, not really, just pushing back a little bit. On the one hand, what you say makes sense because yes, they're sort of giving a nod to the imagery, but saying, but this is a new covenant, it's a new thing. We don't have to be Passover, part 2. Like I get that. And for like a Luke, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just surprised that Matthew went along. If that makes it just seems like that's such a layup for Matthew to take that and do what Paul did with it. Like, yeah, he's our Paschal lamb. Yep. Like it's like it seems would be so easy for Matthew to do that, yet he chooses not to. That's all. I just
How's that pushback?
like saying I don't know if it's pushback or not.
It's pushback against what exactly?
I don't know about whether it's that or whether that's exactly what's happening.
Well, I think some people try to argue that Matthew is like the most Jewish of the Gospels.
Sure.
Which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I will fight that all day long. And so I think that Matthew has a vision of the kingdom that it's resistant to things like Roman imperialism without a doubt, but I think it's also resistant to Jewish nationalism. I think both of those things are things he's pushing back against. And so I think that he does have a more sophisticated view of the kingdom, that it's both Jew and Gentile. And so, like I said, I get a little salty when I hear people say that it's the most Jewish. I'm like, man, you're not reading the gospel very close if you think the other ones are less.
I would suggest that it's about him having more Jewish references. That's what's more Jewy about him.
I love that word, Jew.
Jew-like.
Yes, clearly he sees the kingdom as being bigger than Jews. But to get there, he uses Jewish imagery.
Yeah.
More quotations of Torah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to respond to that, but it's going to take us down a path that's totally outside this
that's fair.
conversation.
That's fair.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me just say this. If this was a Passover meal, it's interesting he didn't say of the meat,
Yeah. That's a
this
really
is
good
my
point.
body
Yeah.
given for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I agree.
that would have been, like, especially, when you think about sacrifice and how, the Passover lamb gives up its life, right? So that the people may be saved. Like, he doesn't go there.
Yeah.
And I wondered, again, he could have done that, right? But meat is not what people eat on a regular basis. Bread is. And
Right,
he
yeah.
wants this, and this may be a case for, celebrating the Lord's Supper more than, a couple of times a year. I mean, Passover was once a year.
Yeah.
But Jesus's breaking bread practice was all the time. And the early churches breaking bread together in each other's homes was all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And meat's not at that all the time meal context, right? I mean, bread is. And so again, maybe he was intentional about shaping this so it can go forward as a regular practice and not that, once a year when you get together to celebrate the Passover, right? Remember me, I'm the new Passover lamb.
Yep.
That's not where he went. It's like, no, as often as you break bread together, which is a regular basis for his followers and for the early church, I want you to remember me in the cup and in the bread.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And that's why I think that he really does shift to this is a new covenant. It's kind of evoking that, Jeremiah 31, I will make a new covenant prophecy there. Like, this is it. And it is a new covenant. And so, yeah, God made a covenant with Israel. We're going to recognize that. We're going to echo that a little bit, but also see it as going in a brand new direction. And so that's why I like the little bit of column A, a little bit of column B approach to it. It's like, yep, we're going to touch on that, but we also got to see it through a new light. And that's what I like about this conversation is that we're recognizing, yeah, it's in a Passover context, but the dissimilarities are really, really strong. And so what does that teach us about the nature of this meal? And yeah, I think that the new covenant part of it is really more at the forefront.
Yeah. And I just think to me, it's important to have this conversation because I hear when people are given communion meditations and stuff like that, there's just a lot of emphasis on the Passover and little emphasis on the breaking bread on a regular basis and little emphasis even on Exodus 24 and the new covenant ceremony. And I guess this conversation is a way of pushing back. It's not like drive Passover away altogether because we read last week where Paul talks about, let us celebrate the feast without unleavened bread. Of course, that's an unleavened festival. But Jesus is our Paschal Lamb.
Right.
So,
Yeah, right.
So it's okay. And elsewhere, I think John's going to make a connection. And Paul, in that passage we read last week, makes the connection. But we shouldn't, amplify that element so much that the others are lost. Yeah. And some people can probably stand to mute the Passover connection a little bit more than they do.
Yeah, it's hard because it's such a great comparison. I mean, when we talk,
it preaches.
Yeah, it preaches great. I mean, the fact that, like in the same way that, Yahweh brought the Israelites the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt, we're set free from slavery to sin, that Christ has accomplished all this on the cross. And the same, like, yes, that preaches great. And it's sort of there, but it's not as clearly there as we often make it out to be. I think is what we're saying, right?
Yeah, and it preaches so well that you don't hear, and in the same way as Jesus broke bread with sinners, in the same way that he broke bread with tax collectors, and in the same way, like you don't get that comparison. So it's not that the Passover comparison is not accurate, helpful, biblical, and instructive, right?
Right.
It's just that it overshadows all the other elements.
Yeah, everything does live in its shadow. And I think the point we're trying to make here is, should we bring it out of the shadow into the light and say, there's something here that's really worth focusing on that, at least for Matthew, Mark, and Luke, might more accurately capture what Jesus is trying to communicate to us.
Yeah, and that covenant aspect, I mean, what we see, most covenant ceremonies in the Old Testament were kind of a regular ongoing thing that recurred. That you, like whenever you see a rainbow, you think
Oh,
of
right,
right,
yeah.
not just the one time,
Yep.
right? Whenever someone is circumcised, and so it's like kind of a joint thing. And whenever you celebrate Sabbath, which was every week, you're reminding yourself of this covenant that we're making. This is Exodus 24. And so the fact that we move towards this regular ongoing thing that's how they did covenant. And we miss that where we turn it into once a year, once and for all, Jesus on the cross.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have about 5 more minutes, but I want to bring out some other elements of comparisons. When you compare the Gospels, we really leaned into that one aspect. So they all have in common the Passover context, which we should point out was a full meal,
Yes.
right? It wasn't just when it was instituted a time of bread and wine. It was a full meal. They all use the language of the bread. This is my body. Matthew and Mark say, "This is my blood." All of them have of the new covenant. Matthew and Mark have poured out for many. Matthew has for the forgiveness of sins, but Mark and Luke don't. And all of them say that he will not drink again until with them in the kingdom. So there's that kingdom language association in all of them. All of them have give thanks language, which really ties to the common meal practice of blessing and giving thanks. And the Greek word here is Eucharisto, right?
That's where we get our word from. Yep.
And so this is why certain people call the Lord's Supper the Eucharist.
Yep.
And that's in all of the accounts. Luke is the one who has do this in remembrance of me, not the others. And Luke also has 2 cups, one before the meal and one after. So that's kind of a uniqueness in Luke. And in Matthew and Mark, they sing a hymn at the end, but not in Luke. There's the
Luke's
anti-singing.
acapella.
Yeah, he's a little tone deaf, and so it's like I don't want to put that out there.
I mean,
More of a podcast guy.
what's interesting about Matthew and Mark, this is the only time we ever hear about Jesus and his disciples singing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
This
true.
is it.
Good point.
It's like when you talk about what is the worship life of the disciples, singing wasn't a really big part, but it seemed to be the way they ended Passover. So it was part of their life, but we don't get, mealtime we have on a regular basis. They're breaking bread together. We don't have regular praise services
Right. Yeah.
as part of the Gospels account.
Daniel carried around a guitar and broke it out every now and then.
Who did?
I don't know, Nathaniel.
Oh, I thought you said Daniel.
For a
I'm
second,
like,
I thought you said Daniel too. Nathaniel.
Nathaniel.
So it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us operate with a synoptic version where we kind of blend the elements of all 3 of them together and throw in a bit from 1 Corinthians. But not all of them say for the forgiveness of sins. Only one of them. But all of them have the new covenant. All of them have Eucharist. Only Luke has do this in remembrance of me, which is interesting. I mean, because people think about it, this is where Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
Luke's the only one that mentions that Jesus says, what you're doing now, I want you to continue to do.
Yeah.
And that's interesting in light of what we noticed last week. Luke is the one who has Jesus eating meals together all the time throughout his life, and especially after his resurrection. And then we have his account of the early church that was breaking bread regularly in each other's homes.
And not to pile on the Passover talk, but like for them, it's mentioned multiple times, especially in Leviticus. This is a holy convocation. You will do this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And here, Luke's the only one who kind of gives a nod to that. For the rest of them don't.
Yeah.
Oh, to me, it's a Spock moment. Remember.
I don't know what he's doing. That delusion fell flat for me. No offense.
I know there's 1 or 2 people out there going, "Yeah, I got it."
But they didn't see your hand.
I know.
The
They didn't
gesture.
see me doing the Vulcan thing there. So
Oh, is that what that was?
yeah,
What
it's
was that?
like that Vulcan.
I thought it was a penguin hand from Batman.
Live long
That's
and
all I
prosper.
saw.
Oh, this is degenerating pretty fast here.
So Luke is the only one that establishes it as an ongoing practice.
Yeah, you're right. Well, and going back to what Sam said, that's what I like about it is that covenants are meant to be remembered. You don't want to just do it one time and everybody forgets. You need something to remind you. But John, your point is great because every time they get together, they're having meals. Let's make sure that this meal isn't just, hey, we're eating, celebrating, which is great. I'm all for that. Celebrate. But let's take something that we do every day and make it a moment of remembrance. And so this is why I encourage, what does it matter if it's at like churches or home churches or whatever, it's a sacred moment, but that doesn't mean that we should avoid it. Let's make this sacred moment a regular part of the rhythm of our life. And it helps us to keep in front of us that we are in a covenant relationship and that Jesus played a big role in that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Luke, who emphasizes, again, this is an institution that you continue, Luke doesn't say, this is my blood. He says, this is the cup of the new covenant. And that's, again, interesting.
Yeah.
Mark and Matthew, this is my blood, as much as this is my body.
Yeah.
Luke doesn't have that aspect. And, is that something he's leaving out? Because, again, he's focusing on the meal thing we do.
Mm-hmm.
In the meal thing, this is a new covenant cup. We renew the covenant every time, and not necessarily we bask in the bloody death of Jesus every time.
Well, I think it makes sense to me because Luke is really arguing for this new vision of a kingdom that's Jew and Gentile together. And Gentiles do not have to become Israelites. That's a big theme, especially plays out in Acts. And so I think for Luke, he would definitely want to focus on anything that drives home that communal aspect of it. And so like the shared meals and all of that, like we are one big family. God has created a new family of Jew and Gentile together. And so, I think that he would want to highlight, front ground that kind of information. Matthew and Mark, this idea of new covenant, still a really big part of it. Jesus' blood is this, kind of the new blood from Exodus 24, the blood that got sprinkled on everybody. People are always like, that's just so gross, sprinkling blood. I'm like, you got to understand, blood is life. Like there's nothing more holy than blood. We have to think of blood as a cleansing agent, not something that makes things dirty. And it just like modern 21st century Americans just freak out. But it's hard to get back in that space of thinking about blood being something that is not only holy, but actually cleanses the things it comes in contact with. And that's obviously what the author of Hebrews wants to make a big deal about.
Yeah. And more can be said and will be said when we're talking about John, of the language of this is my body, this is my blood. And what did Jesus mean by that?
Yeah.
Right? At this table, John's going to talk about people eating his body and drinking his blood to remain in him.
Ugh, that's so gross.
And that's become a huge, point of contention throughout church history and in the church today. So we're gonna leave that until next time,
right?
And return to it. So if you're waiting, when are we going to talk about transubstantiation? We'll do that in connection with John.
Yeah. All right. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the After Class podcast. After class because
the best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Social media pictures and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris. Audio mixing and editing is done by Drew Nyquist. If you've enjoyed this episode of ACP, you might also enjoy GLCC's Master of Arts in Practical Theology degree. In this 36-hour program, you will receive first-rate biblical and theological instruction from John, Ron, Sam, and several of their colleagues at Great Lakes Christian College. To learn more about this program, visit glcc.edu. Get practical and go deep at GLCC.